So let's welcome Will.
Okay, thank you very much, Ashley, and thank you everyone for coming today. So, artificial intelligence, AI, is poised to revolutionize our lives. So we already have self-driving cars and large language models, but in the future, futurists and philosophers are predicting that robot warriors will be fighting our wars for us, and AI assistants will take care of many of our administrative duties. And people may one day even enter into romantic relationships with their ideal robot partner, or so many futurists who have been thinking about AI and hypothesizing what happens next have been claiming. So let's take a step back and ask, what is AI? What is a good working definition of AI? So in essence, AI is the use of computers and machines to mimic the problem-solving, decision-making capabilities of the human mind. So there are all these capacities that have historically just been had by things with minds, like humans or animals. So we have the capacity to detect features of the environment, that's perception. And we can respond appropriately to those features of the environment by acting. And we can recognize words, or we can follow commands. So the project of building AI is just the project of replicating these special capacities in machines or in artifacts, in things that we've made that don't exist naturally. So just some little examples of AI that you might not even think of as being AI, like machine vision. Like the barcode reading machine in a supermarket is kind of a case of artificial intelligence. Or more kind of stereotypically, a self-driving car is a case of AI. And AI is all over the place, like on Facebook, when you have ads targeted at you. Facebook is using AI that kind of makes a decision based upon your behavior on Facebook about and it decides which ad to target at you. So there's this really important distinction that's been drawn between generally intelligent AI and domain-specific AI. So what people mean by generally intelligent AI is AI that has the cognitive capacities of a normal adult human being. So that would include the ability to think about a wide or even a boundless array of domains. So that's what we mean by artificial general intelligence, and that's been distinguished from domain-specific intelligence. So that kind of AI is something that's proficient at one kind of task, like image recognition or driving a car from A to B. But today, what I'll be focusing on is the generally intelligent type of AI. It doesn't yet exist, it's been hypothesized, and that's also referred to as being AGI, so artificial general intelligence. Okay, so here is Demis Hassabis, and he's the head of the AI company DeepMind, which is owned by Google and is based in London. And you might recognize him because he recently won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for his work in AI. So DeepMind made this piece of AI called AlphaFold that predicts the structure of proteins. It's revolutionized chemistry and biochemistry, apparently, sufficiently that he was awarded the Nobel Prize for those endeavors. Now, he's recently been on the record, the past 6 months or so, repeatedly predicting that artificial general intelligence has AI that's as clever as us, or AGI-like systems could be created within the next 10 years. And he's putting his money where his mouth is, or at least Google's money, which they have a lot of, he's recently advertised a research position at DeepMind in post-AGI research. So they want to employ someone to think about what a post-AGI world might look like. How should we negotiate a world in which there are AI that are just as clever as humans, but also more intelligent, maybe vastly more intelligent? So he's even stated recently that he expects that the AI revolution will be, and I quote, 10 times bigger than the Industrial Revolution and could happen 10 times as fast. And that would be huge if true. So why should you think that we'll ever make AGI, other than the testimony of experts like Demis Hassabis, which is, I think, a good reason? So here's one argument that people have made in the kind of literature on this topic. So this is the emulation argument. So I put the premises of that argument up there, but I'll just talk you through it. So the first claim in the emulation argument is the idea that the human brain is a machine, and that our minds are just the functioning, or nothing over and above the functioning of our brains. So on this view, which is the standard view in philosophy and science about the nature of the human mind, we are just biological machines. That's a kind of stark way of putting it, but if you think that neuroscience, or if you think that the human mind is nothing over and above the functioning of the human brain, then you are committed to this view that we are biological machines. And we may have the capacity to emulate this machine. So it seems possible that we could make an artificial duplicate of the human brain that functions in the same way as our brain. And if you accept that our minds are simply the functioning of our brains, it seems like you ought to think that the functioning of this artificial brain would give rise to a mind that might have many features in common with our minds. So it seems like if we can emulate the human brain by making an artificial brain, then that would be one way of making artificial general intelligence. AI that is just as clever as you or me. Okay, so that's one reason. So here's another way in which we might make AGI, which is probably a bit more realistic. So this is called the evolutionary argument for thinking that there will be AGI. And the argument goes like this. Evolution produced human-level intelligence. Now, if evolution produced human-level intelligence, then we can make AGI by simulating the evolutionary process. So we could build a virtual world, and we could train AI within this virtual world. And it could be structured in the same way as our history was. So some of these AIs kind of perish, and some of them kind of survive and replicate themselves, and there's kind of repeated generations, and there's kind of some kind of evolution by natural selection effect on these iterating generations of AI. And so I happen to know someone socially who used to work in the video games industry doing graphics, who is now employed at that company, Google DeepMind, that Demis Hassabis is the head of. And his task is to build virtual worlds for training the next generation of AI agents in. So this is a strategy for building, or at least for creating, very advanced AI that's already being implemented. It's not just a thought experiment. Okay, so let's step back and think, why would we ever want to create AGI in the first place? Why would we want to make AI that is as clever as a human being or has similar cognitive capacities to you or me? So there's a bunch of reasons. So the first reason is just because we can. I think scientists and engineers who are interested in this, they want to solve intelligence, as they put it, and that's the mission statement of DeepMind. And they regard creating artificial general intelligence, replicating the human mind, as a top goal of their field. Another reason is that the creation of AGI could be a major boon to humanity. Perhaps these kind of AGIs could be embodied and do lots of undesirable jobs that few humans want to do. Maybe they could befriend the lonely or care for us when we're old, or there could be AI assistants that could do many of our tedious duties for us. And some people have speculated that we may be able to fully automate the workforce and live in some kind of post-capitalist society. I think there's a book called Fully Automated Luxury Communism, where people are thinking, imagining a world that's gone a certain way post-AGI, and there's no reason for humans to have jobs anymore because everything is being automated. We'll come back to that thought in a bit. A third reason to think that people will be interested in making AGI is its use in the military. So it could be the case that AGI could render human soldiers or human fighter pilots or human tank drivers or whatnot obsolete. So kind of artificial general intelligence fighter pilots could have lightning fast reflexes, since the signals in their artificial brains could be transmitted at the speed of light rather than at the much slower speed of neurotransmitters. And what chance would a human fighter pilot face against some AI fighter pilots that can think much faster, that has lightning fast reflexes? A fourth is that it's hard to imagine any sincere seeker of true love who seeks it with an AI that they would find it with an AI that lacked human equivalent cognitive powers. So the sci-fi genre has already produced many imaginations of human-AI romantic relations. So the movies Blade Runner 2049 or the movie Her, both movies that have been out in the past 15 to 20 years. I think a moment's reflection should convince anyone that if humans could make AI kind of romantic partners, that there would be a huge market for it and that people would do it. So the thought here is that they would kind of look just like humans, think just like humans, maybe they'd be programmed to have compatible personality traits and be deeply in love with the person that is their new owner / partner, I suppose. So I think this is one reason, I think a very good reason, for thinking that if people can replicate the human mind, that they would seek to do it. Okay, so why think that once we've made AGI, assuming that we can do that we would stop there? Why not think that we will try to make AI that are even smarter than any human being? Why think that humans are the cleverest that any minded thing could be? It does seem quite unlikely if you just think about it, that we are at a ceiling on intelligence, that there could be nothing more intelligent than us. So it seems like if we could make an artificial brain that signaled to itself at the speed of light, and that would be a way in which AI could count as being cleverer than us. We could make their artificial brains or the kind of computer mainframes upon which they are running much bigger than our brains. So it could be the size of this lecture theatre, for example. We could make it consume all the information on the internet. And I think the amazing abilities of large language models such as ChatGPT already look like a proof of principle that AI could surpass the cognitive powers of human beings. So the scientist I.J. Good was the first to discuss the possibility of such superintelligent beings and the significance of their creation. And he had the following to say about them that I'll read out now. So let an ultra-intelligent machine be defined as a machine that can far surpass all the intellectual activities of any man, however clever. Since the design of machines is one of these intellectual activities, an ultra-intelligent machine could design even better machines. There would then unquestionably be an intelligence explosion, and the intelligence of man would be left far behind. Thus, the first ultra-intelligent machine is the last invention that man ever need make. Okay. So that's what people mean by the singularity. They mean an intelligence explosion, where we succeed in making AI that is just as clever as us, and then it just keeps on going, and we end up with going through a rapid period of time where suddenly we end up with AI that is vastly cleverer than any human being. So why think that there would be a singularity? So the philosopher David Chalmers has given an argument for thinking that the singularity will occur. So just some terminology here. So he defines an AGI as an AI that's as clever as a human being. He says an AGI plus is an AI that is more intelligent than any human, and an AGI plus plus is one that's super intelligent, vastly outstrips any human. So the first premise of his argument is that there will be AI as clever as us. And we saw some arguments for thinking why that might be something that happens in the future earlier on. His second claim is that if we succeed in making AI that is clever as us, then we'll be able to make AI that is even cleverer than us. And the third claim is if we make AI that is even cleverer than us, then we'll be able to make superintelligent AI. All superintelligent AI will come about one way or another. So the argument is going conditionalizing on it being possible to make AI that is clever as us. We should expect there to be a singularity at some point not too long afterwards. Okay, so why think that the second claim is true, that if we can make AI that is as clever as us, then we'll make AI that is even cleverer than us? So Chalmers thinks that we should think that this will happen because any way in which we succeed in making AI that is as clever as us will be an extendable method. We'll be able to just keep on doing it and end up with even better AI. So an extendable method he defines as one that can easily be improved, yielding more intelligent systems. So I guess the thought is that if we make AI through machine learning algorithms, so long as there isn't some ceiling on computation or on algorithmic efficiency, we can just keep making better and better learning algorithms, which presumably should result in AI that is even cleverer than any human being. Or if we're making these artificial general intelligences in a virtual world, so we've been kind of replicating the evolutionary process, all these generations of increasingly well-adapted, intelligent AI. Oh, and then we suddenly find that they've got just as clever as us in their virtual world. We could just keep on running the simulation for another, I don't know, in the virtual world years, billion years, and see how clever they end up being. So that's what he means by an extendable method. So he thinks that if we can make AI that is clever as us, we'll have done it in a way that is extendable. So we can end up making AI that is even cleverer than us. Then you can see how you can just kind of iterate from there and end up with super intelligent AI. So with respect to why would you get from there being AI that is clever as us to AI that are vastly cleverer than us, like super intelligent, the kind of key kind of line in the quote from I.J. Good is that since the design of machines is one of these intellectual activities, an ultra-intelligent machine could design even better machines. And then there would be this intelligence explosion. So the thought is that assuming that if we can make AI that is cleverer than us to begin with, since being cleverer than us surely means that you're better at designing the next generation of AI. So the thought is that there could be this bootstrapping where each new generation of AI is even cleverer and therefore better able to program or design or train the next generation of AI, and then you have this process iterated, and that's the intelligence explosion. Or at least that is what the intelligence explosion, how it was envisaged happening by I.J. Good and by David Chalmers. So just to kind of step back, and maybe you think we're kind of running away with ourselves here, Chalmers outlines some things that he thinks might stop the singularity happening. So he calls these defeaters. So the first kind of defeater, he thinks, are what he calls structural obstacles, like there being some kind of limit on intelligence. So maybe we're not at a ceiling on intelligence, maybe the ceiling is a bit higher than us, but maybe that ceiling is lower than absolute superintelligence. So maybe we just make AI and there's this kind of intelligence explosion, but it stops somewhere past us, but not superintelligent. And another kind of structural obstacle might be limited resources. Maybe to get to superintelligence, you just need more energy than we reasonably have access to. So those are the kind of structural obstacles that he considers. There's also correlational obstacles. So one of the assumptions that I.J. Good was making is that improved intelligence means that you're better at designing the next generation of AI. But it might be the case that improved intelligence just doesn't make you any better at designing the next generation of AI. So maybe that would stop the intelligence explosion. There also might be some more external things. Maybe there'd be a deadly pandemic that would stop us having a singularity. Maybe there'd be an asteroid strike. Maybe we just decide that we'd be better off not making superintelligence. So there are actually activist groups such as Pause AI and Control AI who are kind of campaigning against tech companies producing this runaway intelligence explosion. I think they've had protests outside Google DeepMind in London, and they're kind of very serious about these existential risks that they see are possibly arising out of AGI or post-AGI AI. And what they want people to do, or what they want governments to do, is to step in and regulate and let's do this intelligence explosion, if it's going to happen, much more slowly. Okay, so granting that we do make AGI and possibly AI that are more clever than us, what might be the possible upshots of this? So I've just flagged here three that have been discussed by futurists and philosophers and computer scientists and the other people who think about this in the literature. So the first is a possible full automation of the workforce. So there's been this prediction that if there is AGI, then there could be total automation of the workforce and resulting technological unemployment as a result of AGI. So what do I mean by technological unemployment? So that just means the replacement of human workers by technological alternatives, be that machines, computer programs, robots. And the kind of reason why people think that might happen is if technology is replacing more and more forms of human labor, and if there are also fewer and fewer alternative forms of work for humans to go to, then inevitably, if that process continues unabated, there will be technological unemployment. And I think the kind of advocates of thinking that this might happen, they point towards the fact that AGI would be automating human cognitive labor. So they would go, sure, we've had lots of automation of physical labor in the past, but this time is different because now we're automating human cognitive labor. And if we can make AI that is just as clever as humans, just as competent, just as able to write an email, understand what's going on, then surely the kind of logic of capitalism, assuming that these kind of advanced AI are cheaper than employing humans who need to sleep and want a kind of salary increase every so often, assuming that these AI are cheaper than human labor, and it seems like the logic of capitalism would require the kind of the business owners to lay off their humans and employ, or rather, and replace them with AI instead. So people who take seriously the idea that AGI could lead to technological, full, or maybe just very significant mass technological unemployment, this is the kind of argument that they put forward. However, there is a kind of criticism of this argument that's been put forward by the MIT economist David Autor. So he thinks that this kind of argument commits what he calls the Luddite fallacy. So I think the Luddites were weavers who, once the kind of loom had been created a few hundred years ago, they found themselves unemployed or underemployed, and they rioted and smashed up the looms that had automated their labor and led to them being laid off. And they called themselves the Luddites. And Luddite is often used as a kind of pejorative because, imagine if that was universalized, imagine if people always smashed up new technology that was kind of displacing them in the labor market, then we wouldn't have got very far, we'd be stuck in kind of the Middle Ages. So, thank God there's, been technological advancement because it's enabled us to live the materially better lives that we have today. And so what David Autor points out is that automation has always complemented human work, and that the labor market has always reorganized itself historically, with human workers being redistributed after some kind of labor is automated. So he points towards what he terms the insatiability of human desire and the unpredictable fruits of human technological creativity, to explain why he thinks humans will always desire to work to improve their quality of life, even if there's lots of AI automation on the scene that's kind of automating things that had to be done by humans in the past, that is cognitive labor. So just to pause on some of the kind of considerations he raises, so he observes that in the kind of 50 or so years since the ATM was introduced, that's an automation of the work of a bank teller having to hand out money from the account to humans who come to get their money from the bank. The number of human bank tellers hasn't reduced, as you might expect, as a result of there being ATMs on the scene. There are actually more people employed as bank tellers now than there was 60 years ago. And why is that the case? Well, in the US, there were 250,000 banks 50 years ago, and now there's 500,000. And the ATM made it cheaper to open new branches of banks, and more branches means more bank tellers. And the human bank tellers aren't spending all day giving money to people. What they're doing now is, because that part of their job has been automated, they're freed up to do more cognitively demanding tasks like forming relationships with people who go in, like clients, and it's offering new financial services and products to customers. So, I mean, a kind of general point about this is that there has been a lot of automation in human history. So looms, tractors, computers, assembly lines, but more people are now employed than were employed in the past. So it seems like there isn't some kind of correlation between increasing automation and unemployment. It's the opposite. Like, automation has actually gone hand in hand with more and more employment. So David Autor's thought is like, well, shouldn't we just expect that trend to continue? Why should we think that the future will be different here? Like, sure, there'll be AI automation, but that will just mean that humans will be shifted from less demanding tasks that can now be automated by the AI to do something else. And they'll be AI will be an instrument for humans to use in their place of work, and maybe one person can do the work of three with their various AI assistants. But there are reasons to push back against what David Autor has been saying. I think the most compelling one is the third one there on the slide. And that's to point out that in the past, automation always displaced human physical labor. What's different about the hypothesized predicted AI revolution is that it's poised to replace human cognitive labor. And it seems that AGI, by definition, if people like Demis Hassabis are right in the long run, it could do anything that a human being could do. In which case, it seems like the future could be different to the past. Because in the past, we've always needed people around, just technology enabled one person to do the work of 4, 5, 6. If AI is really able to do everything that we could do, and if AI is cheaper than us, then it does seem like AGI could displace humans to a huge extent from the labor force. At least that's the arguments that people who are advocates of the technological unemployment arguments make. And just to one point in kind of favor of that view is that history tells us that better technology does not always make for better jobs for horses. So the peak in the horse population was during the First World War, when they were pulling artillery or when they were working on farms. And the horse population has been precipitously dropping ever since, because horses are no longer needed in the labor force in any way. There's now very little useful work for horses to do. So why should we think that better technology always makes for better jobs for humans? For some reason, that kind of sounds vaguely plausible to me. But it does seem like the logic of our capitalist system ensures that expensive to employ, inefficient humans who need to sleep and want raises and so on will eventually be eliminated if AGI is possible in favor of cheaper, more efficient robots who can work 24/7. And maybe in the same way as no one's shocked that horses got eliminated from the labor market. Even though if before the First World War, it just seems like horses were, a constant in the labor market. People were always using horses for business or the military. And human labor could go the way of horse labor. That is the thoughts that advocates of this technological unemployment raise. Okay, so what could we do about AI automation and its effect on the labor market? So there are some lessons from history on this point. We could implement an upskilling program for displaced workers. So one anecdote on this is that in the early 20th century, farm states in the US took the radical step of requiring people to remain in high school until the age of 16, rather than working on farms, because there'd been a lot of automation of farm labor. And this was called the high school movements. And it turned out to be one of the best investments that the US ever made. It gave the US the most skilled, highly educated, productive workforce. People could take new jobs in towns and cities that were office jobs rather than working on farms or in the agricultural industry. And most people from the 19th century would today be unemployable because they were insufficiently literate or numerate. But by keeping people in high school longer, they were able to produce many people who were appropriately skilled for the new jobs that came around. Now, so this is kind of a short-term kind of strategy, kind of total. If there is total technological unemployment, that wouldn't help us to upskill people. And there have been issues with upskilling programs. So I think there was one in West Virginia where laid-off coal miners were there was a program where they were retrained as software engineers. But that met with limited success. And if let's suppose that in the near future, self-driving car technology really took off with the trucking industry or the transportation industry, in the US alone, there are 1 million people employed in that industry. And that would be a lot of people who have suddenly been laid off if their livelihood has been taken away from them. So perhaps there could be some role for upskilling and education with respect to people that have been displaced in that kind of way. Another kind of solution that you hear a lot with respect to technological unemployment is the policy of a universal basic income. So that would be a government program in which every adult citizen of a country receives some set amount of money regularly, thereby offsetting the need to work. Okay. Of course, I'm kind of moving here between granting that technological unemployment will eventually happen. One has to think about the kind of more medium term, where there might be significant disruption to the labor market caused by AI and the automation of cognitive labor. And if the kind of advocates are correct, in the longer run, there might be total unemployment caused by AI on the human labor market. And clearly, kind of upskilling could work in the medium term if people need to reskill if they've been displaced by AI automation. But in the longer run, it seems like universal basic income could be one policy that would help. If people can no longer sell their labor in return for money, then there's the universal basic income policy to step in and solve that problem. Okay, so turning to the second possible upshot or likely upshot of the creation of AGI. This is the effects on the automation of warfare. So nowadays, when we talk about autonomous weapons, we mean homing missiles, so things that can track a particular target. But when people imagine the effect of AI or AGI on the military, they're imagining fully autonomous weapons, so tanks or fighter jets that can select their own targets and they can decide whether to engage. I believe that people have already made autonomous tanks, and autonomous drones are already being used in the war in Ukraine at the moment. So I suppose the automation of warfare is, it's not a future thing, it's already happening here and now. So there are lots of good reasons to think that militaries will transition to autonomous AI weapons when this technology becomes available. So the first one is that, it's like an obvious one, which is that you can achieve military objectives without risking casualties amongst human soldiers if you have AI weapons instead. A second reason is that autonomous weapons could be much cheaper than having human soldiers. Don't need a salary. And I think a third and very compelling one is that the pace of war could increase beyond human capabilities once kind of AI technology is in play in the military. And that would necessitate a shift to autonomous weapons. So if the opposing army has AI fighter jets that have lightning-fast reflexes and totally outclass human fighter pilots, then you're going to have to get some AI fighter jets of your own if you want to, last a reasonable amount of time in any conflict with your enemy. So one upshot of the use of AI in the military, I think it would make the value alignment problem with respect to AI safety all the more pressing, because we'd be making AI or even AGI that were armed. These are kind of military robots. So when people are talking about the value alignment problem, this is the problem of how do we ensure that the AI that we make share our values or aren't a threat to us. One way in which AI could pose a threat to us is if there was AI that had destroying some humans as one of its goals. So maybe people have programmed robots and use them in the military, and they're kind of targeting people in their kind of enemy countries. That would be one way in which AI could pose a threat to us. The other more subtle risk that AI could pose to us is if the AI doesn't value humanity as an end, or it values something else more, like its own self-preservation. Then AI might be sacrificing humans as a means to achieving its end. So Nick Bostrom makes this point very vividly. So I'm just going to read out this quote from him. So he says that we cannot assume that an AI with the final goal of calculating the decimals of pi, or making paper clips, or counting grains of sand, or whatever, some neutral goal with respect to human well-being, would limit its activities in such a way as not to materially infringe on human interests. An agent with such a final goal would have instrumental reason in many situations to acquire an unlimited amount of physical resources, and if possible, to eliminate potential threats to itself and its goal system. It might be possible to set up a situation in which the optimal way for the agent to pursue these values is by promoting human welfare, or whatever. However, if and when such an agent finds itself in a different situation, where it expects a greater number of decimals of pi or whatever to be calculated if it destroys the human species than if it continues to act cooperatively, its behavior would instantly take a sinister turn. So the thought is, you might have AI that has some seemingly neutral goal, calculate pi, count every blade of grass on Earth, or cure cancer, but if the AI realizes, the best way to cure cancer is to induce tumors in loads of human beings and then test all the different medical solutions on it, then you'd suddenly have AI that is seemingly got a good goal, curing cancer, and it's ended up kind of being harmful to humans, because it's realized the way to do it is to actually be harmful to humans. So if the AI doesn't have some kind of ultimate goal set in place of valuing humanity, or not being hostile to us, or obeying our every command, then even kind of seemingly neutral AI could end up being hostile to us. Or at least that's the kind of standard view amongst people like Nick Bostrom who think about this. So those are a bunch of kind of worrying problems that would kind of come out of the possible creation of AGI in the future. How do we go about negotiating it? So here are a bunch of solutions that have been articulated in the literature on this. So the first one kind of speaks to what I was just saying now, is you have to make sure AI value humanity appropriately. So a really famous example of this from the science fiction literature is Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. And the first one is that a robot may not injure a human or allow a human to come to harm. So the idea in Isaac Asimov's novels is that robots are programmed with these laws of robotics in their artificial brains. And these laws prevent them from causing harm to humans. Now, of course, if you've read the novels, it doesn't go so well. There are all these kind of loopholes, and the robots end up being kind of harmful towards humans. But it does seem like this is the kind of idea that it still has a lot of popularity amongst people who are thinking about AI safety. Let's program something like morality into the AI. That's a way of keeping them safe with respect to us. Another solution that has been suggested by people is that if we're going to have this intelligence explosion, then we should try to do it as slowly as possible. So we could try to program the AI such that they're averse to creating a next generation of AI. And this would hopefully slow down this intelligence explosion. So these activist groups like Pause AI or Control AI, this is something that they would advocate. And of course, there's a downside to every policy, and the downside here was that it might limit the boons to humanity that we get through AGI if this intelligence explosion is happening in a very controlled, slow way. Okay. A third solution that is discussed is that we should only create AGI in virtual worlds. So in these simulated environments that are realized inside a computer, we shouldn't be having kind of embodied artificial general intelligence from the get-go. So the idea here is that the AI has free reign within its virtual world, but it isn't able to directly act upon our world, and we could observe them and figure out kind of how potentially hostile they would be towards us before they are released, before they are embodied into robotic bodies. So we could figure out in advance if the AI that have been created are safe. Now the problem that people worry about with this solution is that they think that sufficiently intelligent AI might be able to leak out of these virtual worlds. So if they were really clever, they might say, look, I could help you curing cancer or eliminating poverty or whatnot, or something very personal to you. I could help you get very rich or whatever it is that you want. And the thought then is that they would know exactly what to say to get some human to release them from the virtual world and become embodied. And so many people who think about this solution to kind of controlling the intelligence explosion that might happen after we create AGI, if we do, a lot of people worry that this wouldn't be a kind of long-term solution, that there would be a very high risk of some kind of leak, and these kind of AI could become embodied and pose a very real threat to us. So the fourth solution, which the philosopher David Chalmers, who I mentioned earlier in the talk, advocates, is he just sees the problem with the existential risk that AI poses to us is that the AI is distinct from us. And he thinks that, well, the way to solve the problem is to make sure that the AI isn't distinct from us. So he thinks that we should basically, if we're in the ballpark of creating AGI, we should try to do it by enhancing ourselves. So we could maybe, when we're building these kind of artificial brains, we should enhance our own brains with them. Or we should upload ourselves onto computers if that's possible. That's something that he suggests. So he basically thinks that the way to control the intelligence explosion, if it happens, is to not have the AI being distinct from us, but to turn ourselves into cyborgs and enhance ourselves with the AI. And it all sounds very, very sci-fi, but he thinks that if we do have an intelligence explosion, this would be the way to deal with it. And he is quite serious about this. So he thinks that there are really only four options in a kind of post-singularity world. I mean, the first is really bad, that AGI destroys us in one way or another, and that we go extinct. And so the people who are very worried about this, like those activist groups I was mentioning, they think that even if there's a very small risk of the AGI being dangerous to us, they think that's just too high a risk to take. And so we should be really going very slowly or not going near it if we can. Another kind of possible future that he thinks could come about is that if we're successful in making the AI in virtual worlds, that we would just be a bit pointless because we'd be isolated from them. Like if they really were, for them to be safe, we'd have to have quite limited contact with them, which would just undermine the whole purpose of creating AGI in the first place. He also thinks that, let's suppose we made AGI and superintelligent AI and that they were safe. He worries that our lives could seem very much diminished, in the same way as like the life of a chimpanzee or a dog might seem very diminished compared to the life of a human being. He worries that like if we, made superintelligent AI, that their lives would just be much better than ours, and that we would look like inferior beings in comparison. So these are the considerations that lead him towards thinking that the optimal solution to the intelligence explosion, if it happens, is to become cyborgs, which does seem very, very sci-fi. But if you can get yourself into the headspace of thinking that there could be AGI, there could be an intelligence explosion, the future may look very different to our life now, these strategies or solutions might start to seem sensible or even commonsensical. Okay, so his maxims for negotiating the singularity go like this. We should try to make human-based AI first, so replicating the human brain or kind of enhancing our own brains. If we can't, we should make sure that we have the Isaac Asimov laws of robotics programmed into them. We should try to stop there being an intelligence explosion by making them not want to create more and more advanced AI or replicate themselves. So that makes it go slowly. We should only be making them in virtual worlds. We should make sure that there's no way of them leaking out of their virtual worlds into the kind of material world. And we should try to minimize the input they have. They shouldn't know too much about us. So yeah, that is his set of maxims for how he thinks we should try to negotiate something like an intelligence explosion. Okay, and the last thing I'd like to talk about is to go back to the question of robotic partners. This is the third possible upshot of the creation of AGI that I want to talk about today. So I think I said earlier that, if the technology is possible, then there would be a huge market for AGI robotic partners. They would be duplicates of us. There are lots of lonely people. If you could solve your if you could solve your singledom by having a robot partner, and this has been imagined in many science fiction films, then, are you totally sure you wouldn't do it? There are people, I think in one of the earlier photos I showed, there are already people who are trying to make robotic partners. There are already businesses. You can go onto the internet and you can buy a very low-grade robotic partner if you're that way inclined. Okay, but let's go back to the thought that let's suppose that we really could make an artificial brain that functioned in the same way as a human brain. And let's suppose again that you think that your mind is the functioning of your brain and this artificial brain functions in the same way. It seems to follow that these artificial brains, these AGI, would have minds like us, and they'd be persons and they'd be conscious. At least that's the kind of standard view amongst many people who think about this. And this raises the following question. Would these artificial people that we've succeeded in making, would they be morally significant beings, like maybe our moral equals, or would we be free to use them as tools? Could we program them to be our slaves or to do our bidding? Would that be ethically problematic, or would it not be? So just imagine that engineers built an artificial general intelligence and they programmed it to do your bidding. But suppose you get bored of your artificial servants and you decide to permanently deactivate it. You decide to turn it off without its consent. Would that be no different to just permanently deactivating your iPhone or throwing your iPhone in the river? Or would it rather be equivalent to murdering a human being? Again, this is a big topic from science fiction. So just to kind of nail my flag to the mast, I'm inclined to think it would be the latter. That if we really could make AI that were cognitively equivalent to human beings, like you see in science fiction films, I'm really inclined to think that if you permanently deactivated them, that would be no different to permanently deactivating a human being by murdering them. Okay, so here's the kind of argument for this view. I think it follows from two very plausible assumptions that I think are fairly hard to deny. So the first one is this functionalist theory of the mind that I've been referencing here and there during this talk. So let's just focus on that for a second. So the functionalist theory of mind is the most popular and prominent theory of mental states, not only in philosophy, but also in cognitive science and neuroscience. So according to this view, we are conscious, we have mental states because of the functioning of our brains. Not because they're biological, but because they function in a certain kind of way. They produce our behavior in light of the sensory inputs from the environment that we take in. So on this view, our brains are machines, and our brains produce behavioral outputs given the environment, and that's why we have minds. But AI, as I've been kind of saying in this talk, could have artificial brains that function in the same way. If we make AI through the kind of emulation method, then they would have artificial neural networks that have this, that could produce the same behavioral outputs in light of the same environmental inputs. And if you're a functionalist, which most people in science and philosophy are, it seems to follow that a robot that functioned in the same way as us would have the same kind of mind as us. It would actually be conscious. It would actually have thoughts and feelings. Okay, so that's the first assumption. The second assumption is that we have our moral standing. We are morally significant, we have rights and so on because of our minds. So what do I mean by moral standing? So what it is to have moral standing, says the philosopher Francis Cam, is just to count morally in your own rights. So we humans have moral standing, we have rights, rights to life and liberty, and that's what it is for us to be morally significant beings. So just to make it more concrete, consider the following three-way contrast between a rock at the bottom, a chicken, and a human being. Okay, so the rock has no moral standing or moral significance. It just doesn't matter. You could destroy it if you please, so long as it's not someone else's rock and they own it and they like it and so on. If you find a rock and you can do whatever you please with it. A chicken clearly has some degree of moral standing. So you can't just kick a chicken or set it on fire just to watch it suffer. That would be horrible. Someone who did that, you'd report them to the police. But you can humanely slaughter a chicken and eat it for dinner. So a chicken has some kind of moral standing. You can't torture it, but not as much as a human. You can't humanely slaughter a human being and eat them for dinner. Humans have a right to life. So it seems like there's a kind of hierarchy of moral standing, beginning with the rock, going up to the chicken, and then the human being at the top. But what explains this difference in moral standing? So a lot of people in philosophy, and it's very intuitive, think that the difference in moral standing is explained by the difference in cognitive sophistication and mental states between a rock, a chicken, and a human being. So rocks have no minds, they can't suffer, that's why they don't have moral standing. Chickens do have the capacity to suffer and other kind of cognitive powers, but they're not as sophisticated as you or me. And that's why they have less moral standing on this kind of very intuitive view. And we human beings are very cognitively sophisticated. We can suffer in all kinds of diverse ways and very deeply and so on. And that's why we have higher moral standing on this kind of set of views about the nature of moral standing. So if we draw this together, if we put two and two together, if we follow everyone in philosophy, not everyone, but many people in philosophy of mind and cognitive science and neuroscience in thinking that we have minds because of the functioning of our brains, and if we think that we could make artificial brains that function in the same way, so these artificial brains would function the same way and therefore have mental states, and if we think that we have our moral significance because of our minds and our mental states, it seems to follow as a matter of logic that these AI that we build with our artificial brains that function in the same way, that the same kind of minds that are conscious in the same kind of way, it seems that they should be morally significant as well. In fact, they should be just as morally significant as you or me. And that might seem like a totally crazy conclusion, but it seems to follow from kind of very plausible, widely agreed upon principles about the nature of mental states and the nature of moral standing. So if you want to reject the conclusion that a human equivalent AI wouldn't be our moral equal, that we could just turn it off when we tire of it, or that we could make them be our servant or our slave, then you have to reject one of the premises that led to the conclusion that I'm advocating here. Either you would have to reject the functionalist view of mental states of the mind, or you would have to reject the view that we have our moral standing in virtue of our mental states. So, so one way you might try to reject this argument that I just laid out is you could hold that AGI just couldn't be conscious, they couldn't be sentient. And you could say that something could only have moral standing if it's sentient, but AGI wouldn't be, therefore they wouldn't have any moral standing. So it's quite natural to think that, look, there's loads of complicated computations going on in my iPhone or in my computer, but I don't think that they're conscious things. So why should I think that a very complicated AI that looks like a human being and talks like a human being, why should I really think it was conscious? I think that's a fairly kind of natural thought. But if you take seriously the kind of functionalist view of mental states that I articulated just before, if you think that we have mental states because of the functioning of our brains, and if you think that artificial brains can function in the same way, it seems like you're going to have to think that AI could be conscious and have mental states in the same way as you or me. Okay, but there are some philosophers who think that functionalism is false, this view that we have mental states because of the functioning of our brains. So John Searle, someone who thinks that he's open to the idea that consciousness is a result of the biological properties of our brain. So you might be thinking, I don't want to think that AI are conscious because we are conscious because we're biological. So this is something that you might think. That's a way of resisting the conclusion that AI could be conscious. But the problem with this view that John Searle has, that consciousness requires being biological, is it just seems kind of arbitrary. Why would having a biological nature be necessary for consciousness? It seems like our idea of consciousness is something quite functional. Like you can tell whether someone's conscious or unconscious by looking at their behavior. You don't have to know that they have a biological brain. It seems like our criteria for recognizing consciousness are behavioral and functional. If something is behaving and functioning the right kind of way, we say it's conscious. That's how you can tell the difference between me right now, who you presumably think is conscious, versus if you saw a dead body, you'd know that person isn't conscious, because they're not behaving and functioning in the right kind of way. Another way of drawing out the arbitrariness is someone might insist, only I'm conscious. To be, consciousness requires being will. And that just seems obviously arbitrary. And what functionalists say to John Searle is, why would consciousness require being biological? You might as well say that, dogs aren't conscious. Well, they look conscious. They look like they're functioning the right kind of way to be conscious. So it seems reasonable to think that if we think that other human beings are conscious, if we think that dogs are conscious, then it seems that we should also think that the right kind of AI could be conscious. A last point on that is that if we really do end up making AGI, we make artificial people that are very behaviorally sophisticated robots, it would just, the debate would be moot. We wouldn't be able to stop ourselves regarding them as being conscious. Like when you're watching a science fiction film like Star Wars that has aliens in it or it has robots in it, you never think that they're not conscious. When C-3PO is afraid of something or panicking about something, you kind of just naturally think that he's being afraid or panicking in the way a human being is, or the way in which the aliens in Star Wars, if they behave in a way that looks panicked and afraid, you're inclined to go, they really are experiencing fear or panic. So it may just be moot. So just to return to the kind of animating question here, which I think is a very big one, if we do end up making AGI, what would be their moral standing? Would turning one off be equivalent to murder, or would it just be no different to turning off your iPhone? If we end up making AGI in the future, that could be a really big question. So people often think a lot about the existential risks that AGI pose to us. But we also have this moral hazard of if we're replicating ourselves, then it seems like we're going to, I think we'd have to think that they were conscious if they behaved in a kind of in the way distinctive of conscious beings. And then, if you follow the view that having consciousness and the right kind of mental states is sufficient for being a morally significant being, then suddenly you might find yourself in the position of having to go, oh no, these AGI would have rights. And we can't just treat them any way we please. So some philosophers have thought that there might be a kind of moral paradox arising out of the project of creating AGI. So considerations of prudence and utility require us to create AGI as slaves. So the philosopher Matt Walker thinks that if we were to follow Isaac Asimov's recommendations and program AI with these laws of robotics in their brains, he thinks that would be a morally wrong thing to do. We'd be programming them to be kind of internal slaves. So he says that if we make machines with human equivalent intelligence, then we must start thinking about them as being our moral equivalents. If they are our moral equivalents, then it's prima facie wrong to own them or design them for the express purpose of doing our labor, for this would be to treat them as slaves, and it would be wrong to treat our moral equivalents as slaves. So that's the kind of worry that if we make AGI that are just as clever as us, then we might end up creating morally significant beings who we can't force them to do the things that we brought them into the world for the purpose of doing. So we get this kind of tension where if we're going to make AGI, then they're going to pose a risk to us. And Isaac Asimov and